A very beautiful community. Welcome to this Vlad Reacts episode. It's a rare privilege for me to sit in the garden, which I can't do every day, even for 15 minutes at the moment for health reasons. So I'm doing it right now, and I thought as soon as I came down, I would take you with me. So let's rock and roll. Destiny is first.
Have to think that the other person is genuinely doing what they think is best for the world, because as soon as you start getting this mindset that somebody's trying to like corrupt or poison society, you've lost the plot and you have lost your ability to like understand.
You're saying stay in the matrix.
Destiny. I'm saying people on the right will look at people on the left and go, you're trying to weaken men. But the reality is people on the left probably are thinking like, you know what, I think that if people were more sensitive, more emotional, we'd have a better society. It's coming from a place of compassion. Whether you believe it or not, it is.
Destiny.
And that's important to recognize real quick. People on the left will do the same with people on the right. They'll say, oh, you want women to stay home, you fucking hate women, you want to be slaves. Not really. They just think they're happier there. They think they're better there.
Okay. It's difficult because destiny might have been compressed there into being out of context. I think a very important distinction here, beautiful community, between sincerity and good intent. Don't confuse the two, right? There's a lot of people doing bad things out of sincere commitment to, for example, certain kinds of principle, while at the same time also being motivated by destructive elements of intent. I mean, take Lenin. He writes one of his notes, round up 100 rich peasants and exterminate them so that the people will see, so that the people will tremble, nearly verbatim. Now, Lenin says, well, that's just a correct theoretical elaboration of Marx to make the transition onto the next historical stage work better. But at the same time, it's also an expression of various kinds of destructive and unlovely instincts in Lenin himself. So we want to be careful about this. We don't want to go around saying, you know, well, Jürgen Klinsmann, when he scored all these goals for the German national team, was acting out of thoughts about, you know, doing the best thing for his country, and so was Himmler, right? So distinguish between sincerity and soundness of intent. What I think is absolutely right with what Destiny says is that sincerity is often underestimated. A heck of a lot more destructive action than most people allow in the political world is sincere. For sincere, done out of sincere ideas, that people really think this is the right thing for me to be doing. But if somebody like that came into a therapeutic space, the therapist would obviously need to analyze what lies below. And when we look at what lies below, it's certainly not always going to be lovely. So keep that distinction in mind. A lot of people genuinely could pass a lie detector test if you ask them, do you think you're doing the right thing? And at the same time, be acting out of very destructive intent. Now we've got the lovely Yuval Harari.
This extremely cynical view of humans is not true. Yes, humans are interested in power to some extent in some situations, but this is not the only thing that we want. We are not power-crazy demons. If you look at yourself, start with yourself. Mm-hmm. If I look at myself, do I want power in life? Yes, in some situations I want. This is not the only thing. I really want to know the truth about myself, my life, the world. And the key reason for that is that if you don't know the truth about yourself, you can never be happy.
Ooh. It's absolutely right that humans are motivated by an ill-assorted bricolage of motivational material, and so power is just one thing we want among many other items that we want. So that's right. But there is a but, and that's that humans who have enormous power are made by having enormous power to want power more. So being human doesn't make us want power above all, but being in power makes you want to keep that power and have more of it in a way that is very dangerous and unhealthy. It doesn't just apply to tyrants like Mr. Putin. Look at what happened to Joe Biden. Joe was a man who, in the middle of a raging crisis of trust, progressively lost the capacity to communicate effectively. And yet he wanted a second term. That was partly about his conviction about what an effective operator he was, but that's wrapped in with the idea that you want to keep the enormous power you've got. It's largely the thirst for power that kept Joe, a Democratic politician, wanting to stay on when it made no democratic sense whatsoever. So, no, we're not obsessed with power, but having a lot of it makes us more focused on keeping it and wanting more of it than on anything else. Ex-UK Prime Minister Tony Blair.
I think we have become very, very focused on mental health, and with people self-diagnosing on mental health, and I think we need a proper public conversation about that, because I think it's a very, very difficult question. We're spending vastly more on mental health now than we did a few years ago, and it's hard to see what the objective reasons for that are. And if we're not careful, we get into a position where people, life has its ups and downs, and everybody experiences those, and you've got to be careful of encouraging people to think they've got some sort of condition other than simply confronting the challenges of life. And so we need a proper public conversation about this.
I'm not sure my physical health right now is up to dealing with the complexity of what Blair's put on the table there. So I don't know how much he understands all the things that are sometimes put rightly and sometimes wrongly under the mental health umbrella. So, for example, growing neurodiversity diagnoses, ADHD and autism, they're not a mental health issue. These are not mental health conditions any more than they're intellectual disabilities, which they're not either. So all of that isn't part of the picture. Well, what is part of the picture? Well, obviously, depression and anxiety disorders, for instance, clearly are. Then the question arises, how much of what you're talking about is biologic, not really to do with psychology, and how much of what you're talking about is, if you like, reactively psychological. If I put a parasite into your tummy, I got a parasite myself in about 2018, and until we clear it from your body, it might just wreak havoc with your brain, and you're not going to have a mental health condition in the sense that something's gone psychologically wrong with you, although it will play around really badly with your psychology. So if we're just focusing on reactive psychological malfunction in humans, there are cultural questions about why there might be more of it that we should absolutely raise. But the bottom line is, if you've got a mental health challenge, you've got a mental health challenge. And for all of our growing discourse about mental health challenges, we have to acknowledge that even though there might not be as much stigma about mental health as there is about some other things like chronic illness, there's still a lot of stigma about mental health. And we need to fight it, and from that point of view, Tony Blair's words don't help. What I would say is that victim culture, and we are a victim culture, is politically unconstructive. And a lot of our social justice projects have recently been driven by victim culture, which is why they're losing, in fact, and partly why they're generating results like Trump's victory. I'd also say that certain ways of relating to the world under certain cultures can perpetuate trauma. And the way trauma is perpetuated is when you lose a capacity to access what the person who did the bad thing to you was thinking and feeling when they did that bad thing to you. So let's take an example. Let's say that I do something I physically can't at the moment, and that's sort of go over there and walk 150 meters that way. And let's say somebody comes up to me and confiscates my, I don't know, my health watch or something, because they're bigger and stronger than me. And then let's say they punch me in the face and I have a mildly broken nose. Now that's not a major event, but I'm not going to be traumatized by that at all. Why will I not be traumatized? Because I'll immediately be able to feel what that person is going through when they're doing this to me. That's to say, I won't feel that some kind of unintelligible malign force has got me. I will say that Ricky, who happens to be 6'4", beat me up because Ricky is dysfunctional in various ways, and Ricky is disordered in his mental world in various ways, and Ricky misbehaved like that. If, on the other hand, I couldn't put myself in Ricky's head, that would promote a traumatic response in me, because it would create the kind of discombobulation about the world attacking me, right? That will allow me to transpose my event with Ricky onto my other experiences with life. Is our culture much more conducive on an historical scale to that? Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of it. But if we were to balance all of this, I don't love what Tony has said there, because first and foremost, I want him to say, look, we still have a lot of work to do on mental health stigma. I've done a 3 out of 10 job on this, but this is my best. Next, we have the beautiful filmmaker Werner Herzog on It Looks Like Psychoanalysis.
I think it is one of the greatest stupidities and the greatest mistakes of the 20th century. There's something finally and definitively wrong about psychoanalysis. All my figures in my films are not really psychoanalysis. They are not captured with psychoanalysis. And I believe that explaining every dark little corner that we have in our soul is a very unhealthy and a very stupid and a very dangerous thing. We should not do that. Why? Because when you inhabit a house and you illuminate every last corner of the house with strong lights, the house becomes uninhabitable.
When you illuminate the house, it becomes uninhabitable. So I'm an enormous admirer of the psychoanalytic ritual, but I love what Werner has said. Now notice that he didn't say that when you turn on the light in every room in the house, the light doesn't turn on and you can't see anything. It's precisely because the light does turn on and because you do see things that it's unhealthy for Werner. So he's not undermining psychoanalysis epistemically. If anything, he's saying it's because of its epistemic reach that it puts humans into an unhealthy predicament of looking into themselves too much. So the thought that any culture which contains psychoanalysis must be a bit sick is actually compatible with the thought that in such a culture, psychoanalysis might be one of the best things that it contains. There is no conflict between these two thoughts. And so what's wonderful about Herzog is that he is not an intellectual, but he has extremely healthy intellectual instincts. And here he is simply expressing a Nietzschean intellectual instinct, which says a certain degree of historically unprecedented reflectiveness is going to make a culture screwed. And it might be that that reflectiveness makes the culture more truthful. It makes the culture more connected with certain forms of self-understanding that weren't available to previous cultures. But it's self-understanding that could sink them. And once you take what Werner says that way, I think it becomes a very, very healthy provocation, even to somebody who might at the same time want to insist that the psychoanalytic ritual is probably the only ritualistic experience in Western life today that remains rich and sort of uncorrupted, unevacuated by our extremely reflective experience. Many other rituals we go through are emaciated, right? We no longer believe in the things that drive them, we just go through the motions symbolically. But psychoanalysis is an important ritual, and its beauty and its importance to us, and its enormous effect on just minimizing human suffering, right? Enormous potential for minimizing human suffering, at least, because it's an elitist enterprise available only to a few. That's all compatible with the idea that the Western world is in a kind of decay because of its peculiar and uncozy and unaccommodating level of reflectiveness. Next we have I don't know who.
I'm curious if you've gotten that it's all connected yet. The genocide in Palestine, what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Congo, what's happening in Ethiopia, the fires in California, the floods on the East Coast. Have you gotten that it's all connected yet? Do you understand that the cult of capitalism has caused this? That the idea of supremacy, a supreme race, a supreme religion, a supreme spirituality causes global disaster? Do you not understand that this is just an extension of the Crusades? Do you not understand that the epidemic of narcissism is actually internalized capitalism, internalized supremacy, internalized idea that someone could be superior than anyone else? Do we not get yet that unless we're following that all beings are one being and we center those who've been the most oppressed historically by the systems at hand, and the oppressive systems are racism, sexism, classism, and militarism, so people who don't fit the status quo of that, aka Christian, heteronormative, white, etc., and rich or trying to be rich, we must center the marginalized communities first.
Right. Let's try. I don't like this video, as you might imagine. Why can't this young woman, I'm not suggesting she is for a moment, herself be a narcissist while critiquing capitalism? The idea that capitalism lies at the core of various deformations we suffer in our personalities or in our capacity for collective coexistence needs to be in every case established, right? I mean, the fires in California, well, look at the extraordinary assault on climate and natural environment of the non-capitalist communist experiment in which I was born in 1981. The Soviet Union wasn't a capitalist society, and it has an absolutely shocking history of environmental calamity. So, as is always the case, you've got to ask, is this capitalism or is this humans? And I would say that the climate catastrophe, for example, is a product of human beings and how they relate to one another, mediated by the kind of political institutions they have established. States and institutions within states. I don't think that you want to rapidly get away from that and say it's just capitalism, and you move that away and then we're suddenly going to have an adequate relationship with nature. That's implausible to me. And I think that there are a lot of cultural critics who, if you like, gas out explanatorily by just saying, oh, it's capitalism. So I think that that's the single most important thing intellectually that I would say. Sociologically, there is something self-refuting potentially about this video, because here is somebody in a very skillful way going through the motions that Instagram, in this case, wants you to go through to get more views and more traction, to make a point about how all such life is a kind of moral and political disaster. Well, there's a tension there, and it's a very common tension. We have people speaking much more prominently than this young person in our culture, who say such and so is what's terribly wrong with our culture, but they say it while themselves being a very dramatic instantiation of the very thing that they're critiquing. Slavoj Žižek is a very clear example of that. I mean, he is a wonderful pop consumerist phenomena who criticizes pop consumerism. And he would not be completely deaf to that kind of irony and paradox. That's a sociological problem. The intellectual problem is you've got to not gas out by saying capitalism and now we can stop the conversation. Most of the time when people do that, even though of course you can say that there's all kinds of deformations capitalism causes, but most of the time when people say that, they've explanatorily gassed out rather than pointed as to some kind of all-encompassing cause of what's gone wrong. Enough? Lots of love.